Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be diving in.
Today, we're really getting into the American founding blueprint. We'll be looking at it through the arguments in the Federalist Papers, which many of you will know.
Classics.
But we're also bringing in another perspective.
Yeah.
There's this interesting article, Christianity and the American Founding Blueprint, Heritage, Change, and Contemporary Resonance.
Right. And that article offers a, let's say, specific viewpoint on how Christian thinking might have influenced those foundational ideas.
So our goal today, we want to guide you through the core arguments in these sources about the Constitution structure.
And then really unpack that article's take on the whole history, the connection between Christian values and the American ideal, how it maybe changed over time and, where it stands now.
It's about understanding what they proposed, why they proposed it,
Yeah.
according to these texts.
And how this one particular viewpoint sees the maybe deeper cultural and moral stuff underneath it all.
Okay, so let's start with the problem they were trying to fix. Before the Constitution, there were the Articles of Confederation. What was that like, according to the Federalist Papers?
Well, the picture the sources paint is pretty grim, frankly. They describe the government under the Articles as, well, soft, ineffective.
Soft.
Yeah, just not up to handling the big national challenges they were facing at the time.
What made it so weak? What were the big flaws they saw?
Well, a really central issue highlighted in the sources was its basic setup. It legislated for the states collectively, not directly for individuals.
Okay, so it could just pass a law that applied to everyone.
Not directly, no. Think of it like sending a polite request to each state government saying, please comply or please send money.
Rather than having a law with actual teeth.
Exactly. And that made enforcement incredibly difficult. The sources even hint that getting states to comply sometimes felt like it might need, well, almost a war against a non-compliant state. A bit extreme, maybe, but it shows the frustration.
Wow. So just asking states nicely for money or cooperation wasn't exactly reliable.
Not at all, especially the money situation. That was particularly dire. The papers are quoted saying that relying on state requisitions basically admitted the system was broken. You couldn't depend on it.
And it wasn't just money troubles.
No. This weak structure meant the government really struggled. It couldn't keep the country unified, couldn't manage finances, couldn't handle threats from outside, couldn't even sort out disputes between the states effectively. It was just, well, unstable in their view.
It sounds like they genuinely thought the whole experiment might just fall apart.
Oh, absolutely. The stakes felt incredibly high. The Federalist Papers arguments, based on what we're seeing in these sources, they really hammer home the indispensable necessity of government.
Indispensable. Strong word.
It is. They argued very forcefully that staying unified was crucial for safety, for peace at home, for protecting trade, for defending common interests, both from internal fights and, outside meddling.
And they were worried about breaking up into smaller confederacies or something.
Exactly. Or worse. There is this really powerful quote mentioned, a warning that if the Union dissolved, America would have to cry out, farewell, a long farewell to all my greatness.
That really drives home the sense of urgency they felt.
It does. You get why they were pushing so hard for something new.
Okay, that context is crucial. So the solution they proposed in the Federalist Papers was this radically different thing, an energetic federal government. How is this government supposed to fix the weaknesses of the Articles?
The core idea, the big shift, was creating a government that could act directly on individuals and, well, things, not just filter everything through the state governments.
Right. Get past the middlemen, so to speak.
Kind of, yeah. This direct power was seen as absolutely necessary to achieve the big national goals. Common defense, handling foreign policy, regulating commerce between states, and critically collecting taxes directly and reliably.
So it could actually fund itself and enforce its own laws.
Precisely. As one source puts it, a government needs the power of reaching men and things, direct impact.
Okay. Now, this is where that second source comes in the article, Christianity and the American Founding Blueprint. It adds another layer to this. It tries to look at the thinking behind some of these structural choices. According to this article, what was influencing Hamilton, Madison, Jay?
Well, this specific article argues that their thinking was deeply influenced by Christianity.
Deeply influenced.
Yeah. It basically puts forward the idea that core Christian values were seen by them as compatible with the founding ideals they were laying out.
Compatible how?
And that this compatibility actually played a pretty significant role in shaping the institutions they designed in the Constitution.
That's a specific claim. How does the article connect that alleged Christian influence to the actual mechanics we see in the Federalist Papers, like the specific government design?
Well, one key area the article seems to point to, based on our sources, is how they understood human nature.
Ah, okay. What people are like.
Right. The Federalist Papers don't exactly present a rosy view of humanity. They're quite upfront about motives like ambition, greed, the tendency towards factions and party spirit.
Doesn't sound very optimistic.
It's realistic, maybe? One source even mentions that the Federalist comments on this operating in politics as in religion, which suggests, a recognition of inherent human flaws or fallibility.
Interesting parallel.
And the article, from its perspective, suggests that this realistic, maybe even slightly skeptical view of human motives, which it links to Christian ideas about sin or imperfection, was fundamental to their thinking.
So the idea that, people aren't perfect angels, they're not always rational or selfless, that actually informed how they built the government.
That seems to be exactly the connection the article is making. This understanding meant you had to build in safeguards. You needed checks, balances, structures to prevent power from concentrating or being abused.
Because you had to assume that people in power might be driven by self-interest or factionalism.
That's the logic presented. You build the system anticipating those human failings.
And the Federalist Papers are, of course, famous for those kinds of structural safeguards. Let's take through a few they really emphasized. Federalism, for instance.
Right. Federalism, that's the vertical division of power, essentially. They were trying to strike a balance.
A balance between...
Between a national government strong enough to handle national issues, defense, interstate commerce, things listed in the Constitution, and preserving significant authority for the states. What the sources call residuary sovereignty. Power is not given to the feds, stayed with the states.
Okay, so power divided between national and state levels. And then there's the horizontal division, separation of powers, checks and balances.
Exactly. The classic Montesquieu idea, which the sources mention, putting legislative, executive, and judicial power all in the same hands is, well, tyranny.
The definition of tyranny, yeah.
But the Federalist Papers argue the Constitution doesn't create these completely rigid, separate boxes. It actually allows for a partial mixture or constitutional control between the branches.
So they overlap a bit.
Deliberately. That's not seen as a flaw. It's a key feature. It's supposed to give each branch the tools to defend itself, to push back if another branch tries to grab too much power.
Ah, so the mixing is the check.
Precisely. And they specifically noted, based on experience, I guess, that the legislative branch, Congress, naturally tends to become the most powerful in a republic. So it needed strong checks.
Okay, so it's not about total separation, but weaving them together just enough so they kind of constantly bump up against each other and restrain each other.
That's the ingenious idea, yeah. And within that whole system, the judiciary plays this really unique, really crucial role. Our sources emphasize judicial independence as a vital fortress.
A fortress. For what?
For protecting the Constitution itself and also individual rights.
Okay, how did they propose to make judges independent? What were the mechanisms?
The sources point to two main things baked into the design. First, permanency of tenure. Judges serve during good behavior.
Which basically means for life, unless they mess up badly enough to be impeached.
Pretty much, yes. And second, their compensation is fixed. It can't be lowered while they're in office.
Ah, so Congress can't threaten to cut their pay if they don't like a ruling? And the president can't just fire them?
Exactly right. The idea is to insulate them from political pressure, from shifting public opinion, from threats or inducements from the other branches. It frees them up to just apply the law and the Constitution fairly, without fear or favor.
But where does their power actually come from? They don't command troops like the president or control the budget like Congress.
It's described really well in the sources. The judiciary has, quote, neither force nor will, but merely judgment. Its power lies purely in its ability to interpret the laws and, most importantly, to interpret the Constitution.
Which brings us straight to judicial review, a massive concept in the U.S. system.
Huge! And the Federalist Papers, as our sources present it, lay out the rationale very clearly. They argued the Constitution is the fundamental law. It's supreme.
Above ordinary laws passed by Congress.
Yes. So if Congress passes a law that clashes with the Constitution, it's the judge's duty, their responsibility, to uphold the Constitution and declare that conflicting law void, unconstitutional.
They have to choose the fundamental law over the regular one.
Right. The source quotes, a constitution is, in fact, a fundamental law. It therefore belongs to them, the judges, to ascertain its meaning.
And this power, judicial review, it's seen as crucial for protecting individual liberties, even minority rights.
Absolutely. Think about it. In a system where the majority rules through elected lawmakers, what stops that majority from passing laws that might be unfair or oppressive to a minority group, or that violate someone's basic constitutional rights?
The independent judiciary applying the Constitution.
That's the idea. It acts as a critical safeguard. The Constitution becomes the higher standard that protects everyone, especially those who might lose out in a purely majoritarian vote.
Okay. Beyond these big structures, federalism, separation of powers, judiciary tuges, the sources also mention some specific rights or limitations that the Federalist Papers highlighted, things written right into the Constitution.
Yes, they pointed to several. Things like prohibiting bills of attainder.
Remind us what those are.
That's when the legislature just passes a law declaring someone guilty of a crime and punishing them without any trial. A big no-no.
Okay, definitely sounds like a basic fairness issue.
And also ex post facto laws. Laws that make something illegal after you've already done it, also forbidden.
Fundamental due process stuff.
Exactly. The sources also flag the explicit guarantee of trial by jury in criminal cases, another key protection. And interestingly, the ban on granting titles of nobility.
No dukes or earls in America. Why was that considered so important?
Well, the sources describe it as the cornerstone of Republican government. It was a clear rejection of the old European system of inherited status and privilege. It signaled a commitment to equality before the law, which is, pretty fundamental for a republic.
Makes sense.
And one other argument the papers made, according to the sources, was that the Constitution's structure itself, the fact that it only granted specific listed powers to the federal government.
The enumerated powers.
Right. That this inherently acted like a Bill of Rights. Because if a power wasn't listed, the government simply didn't have it. So anything not granted was, in effect, reserved to the people or the states.
Okay, that's a fascinating argument, though obviously they did add a separate Bill of Rights later.
They did indeed, but that was part of the initial defense of the Constitution as written.
So a lot of very deliberate design here, aiming for a stable republic that protects liberty by carefully limiting and dividing up government power.
That's the picture painted in the Federalist Papers, yes.
Now, let's swing back to that article, Christianity in the American Founding Blueprint. How does it see the transmission of these ideas over time and the changes? And what does it say about how relevant this all is today, its contemporary resonance?
Okay, so the article, based on our source summaries, it acknowledges that, yeah, things have changed. Society has evolved.
Including the role of religion.
It seems to imply that, yes. Specifically, it notes what could be seen as a decrease in the perhaps public dominance of Christianity compared to the founding era.
Okay.
But it argues that the core values it connects with Christian influence, things like the dignity of the individual, a sense of moral responsibility, commitment to the public good or welfare.
Values it sees as rooted in that tradition.
Right. It argues those values continue to resonate. They're still part of the broader American national ideal, even if the religious landscape itself has changed.
So the underlying principles might still be influential, even if the outward expression or dominance of the religion has lessened.
That seems to be the article's core argument about resonance. It suggests these values aren't just historical artifacts. They still pop up. They still play a role in, current debates, political, cultural, social discussions in America today.
And there was something mentioned in the summary about looking back at the Federalist Papers now.
Yes, one of the source summaries, summarizing the article's viewpoint, mentions this idea that maybe contemporary America could benefit from looking at the Federalist Papers almost like a mirror.
A mirror?
Yeah, and that perhaps what's needed is something the source calls an ideological revival.
Interesting phrase, like a call to revisit those foundational principles and debates.
That seems to be the implication. And the article, concluding from its perspective, according to our sources, suggests that Christian thought, viewed as a kind of moral cornerstone, can still offer spiritual guidance.
Guidance for what?
For the nation as it tries to navigate the very complex modern world and live up to its own stated ideals, pursuing that city on a hill idea, maybe.
Okay, so this deep dive has taken us quite a journey. From the edge of failure under the articles, through the detailed arguments in the Federalist Papers for this new, carefully structured union.
Building that fortress.
Right. and then exploring this specific perspective from the article on how Christian thought might have shaped those ideas and how those underlying values might still echo today in the American ideal.
It's definitely a layered look. You've got the mechanics of government on one hand, and then these ideas about the values that might have informed the whole project.
Which leads us to a final thought for you, the listener. Considering these powerful historical arguments for how American government was structured, laid out in the Federalist Papers.
And considering the article's view on the enduring influence of these underlying values, it identifies like individual dignity and moral responsibility.
What does all this history suggest about how citizens today should approach the big debates we have about the nation's purpose and its future?
That's definitely something to chew on, a fundamental question for any generation trying to figure out what it stands for.
Indeed it is. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you. It was a great discussion.